There is something very special in the mindset of entrepreneurs and innovators, the people that start up new companies or develop new innovations that go on to change the world. The type of people that are never satisfied with the status quo and always looking to improve the world around them. In today's episode of The Leadership Project, I'm joined by Gena Gorlin, a clinical psychologist who specializes in the builder's mindset. We unpack the characterization of a builder and discuss what it takes to change your own mindset and to develop the mindset of an innovator and entrepreneur. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Gena Gorlin. Gena is a clinical psychologist who focuses on coaching founders around a concept called the builder's mindset. And that's what we're going to unpack today. And whether you're a founder or not, the concept behind the builder's mindset is going to be applicable to you in your leadership and how you approach your team, your organization, and all of the work that you do, including yourself. So without any further ado, I'm really excited to unpack this concept with Gena today. Gena, I'd love it if you would please introduce yourself to the audience and give us a little flavor of your very interesting background, including your past before you landed in this world around psychology and the builder's mindset.
Sure thing. And thank you so much for having me on. So as you mentioned, Mick, I'm a clinical psychologist. Let's go, to give you some flavor. So I'm a first-generation immigrant, zeroth generation immigrant, technically, because I immigrated here with my family when I was a kid, when I was 7, from the now high-profile Ukraine, given everything happening there. No family, everyone's okay. I know people ask. But that's really shaped a lot of my approach and perspective, I would say. And then I knew I wanted to study psychology from very early on. I also wanted to be an opera singer and a violinist and a musical theater star when I was in high school. And I actually insisted on this, probably speaks to my eventual kind of perspective and approach, that I just really needed to do it all. And I needed to rule things out the hard way. So I actually did a dual degree program at a conservatory and at a university. So at Tufts University and New England Conservatory, they had this 5-year dual degree program where you could do 2 bachelor's degrees for the price of one and in roughly the time of one. It was insane. I quit after a year and a half, but I needed to try. Then I doubled down on my real love, which is psychology. And I went to graduate school in clinical psychology, mainly because I realized that's the best way to position myself to get to still do it all. In this case, meaning to be a researcher, to be a teacher, and to be a therapist, to do private practice and to be licensed, and to be able to take on all kinds of roles, be very versatile, both in and out of academia. And then I really took advantage of that in my subsequent professional career when I decided to really shift my focus toward coaching and in some cases doing therapy with entrepreneurs, ambitious innovators, leaders, people who are charting their own path, who are self-creating, as I sometimes describe it. And I've really doubled down on taking the learnings of clinical psychology, everything I've learned from my research, from the science of behavior change, from doing lots and lots of therapy, and applying it to what I see as an underserved population, though not often spoken of that way, which is the group of people who are trying to break new ground, who are trying to do hard things. And the reason they need psychological support is not per se because they have a mental health problem, although many do struggle with mental health problems. But that's not the distinguishing characteristic. The distinguishing characteristic is that they're trying to do something where there's no playbook because they're the ones inventing the playbook, or they're disrupting, their industry, or they're trying to design a new approach to team building or leadership. They're trying to create a new model, create a new template for doing whatever it is they're doing. And that's what makes it hard. And that's what brings on the anxiety and the imposter syndrome and the, communicational breakdowns and all the things I'm sure we'll talk about. But that the impact I can have by really partnering with such people and helping them raise their psychological ceiling, which is kind of how I think about my work, that impact in my mind, is massive, because then they're going to go on to impact the world in a better way, I hope, right, than if these psychological obstacles had limited them. So that's what I'm up to now.
Yeah, really good, Gena. I want to unpack two things there. The first one, very interesting point, and there is still some stigma out there in society. So I'd like to address one thing is a lot of people think about a clinical psychologist as where someone has got mental illness or has got some kind of problem, and using a resolving mindset, they're trying to resolve something from their past or even resolve something from their present. Whereas what you said was raise the psychological ceiling. So psychology is not just about resolving issues. It's about raising performance. It's about high performance. It's about addressing the art of the possible and going forward. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's important to note. Then from there, what I'd love to know is what makes that important to you? This working with people that are breaking new ground. It's when I look at you talk about that, it seems quite important to you. What is it about it that makes it important to you?
It's a great question that I could go on and on about. A couple things. So I think fundamentally, they represent to me a kind of human ideal that inspires me, that I personally aspire to, that I am inspired by my clients every day. They're doing things that I can't even dream of doing, and that I hope to someday be able to even begin to emulate. And I get to help them with that by bringing my own little bit of expertise to helping unblock certain emotional confusions, or kind of helping them to get clarity on their own complex decision-making process. But like, they are emulated to me, like they represent humanity at its best. They are living their fullest lives. They are out there, breaking new ground and failing and trying again and getting back up and, experimenting with different ways of, whether it's marketing their product, whether it's, leveraging AI and trying to grapple with unsolved problems that, the world's greatest minds are grappling with. And there they are, kind of in the bullpen, trying to figure this stuff out. Like, they are living fully. And to me, I've really come to see that human ideal. I've come to see the builder, which is why I talk about the builder's mindset, like the person who is really taking charge of building their life their way. Like, it's their distinct path, right? Like, they have set things up in their life so that they are drinking that life to the least, so that they're, fully alive to every moment and choosing the experiences that are important to them, choosing the people they want to experience, those things with. And I feel more alive in their presence. So, I know that's a bit of a fuzzy, warm and fuzzy kind of touchy-feely answer, but it's a very honest one for me. That's who I want to empower, because that's who I want to learn from.
Oh, I love it, Gena. And there's two things I'm hearing there. First of all, a virtuous cycle, because you are enabling their success. You're helping them to do what they do, and in return, they're inspiring you back. It's almost a perfect relationship. I just love it. I want to then unpack this building a little bit more, and I've got a very specific question to ask you. So you're talking about people that are building their life the way they want their life and breaking new ground. These are the terms that you keep using, which I think are wonderful. I want to know, from a psychology point of view, is there a certain subset of people in the world that are just wired this way? Now, bear with me for a second. We know that generally people fear change, they fear the unknown, that their fear of loss is greater than their appreciation of gain. And yet here is this subset of people that go, I don't care about that. And they challenge the status quo. They go, okay.
Supposedly they don't care.
Tell me more. Okay,
that's where I come in, because they care.
Okay. All right. Let's unpack that. Let's go.
That's great. So I'm glad you're asking. Yeah, I hear your question. Maybe a two-part question. One, is there a certain subset of people, is there a personality profile for which this kind of ambitious, innovative career in life is suitable. And maybe then the second part of the question is what's different about them, if so, right? Or how do they overcome what seem to be these near universal confines that keep the rest of us scared, right? Or keep us repeating the status quo. So on the first question, yes and no. I think there's a really important sense in which I would answer no, because, when I said it's a human ideal, when I said it's these people kind of embody what I myself aspire to, what I mean by that is that they are these very high profile or kind of very in your face exemplars of what I actually think all of us within our scope and sort of to the extent of our personal kind of reach and preferences and capacity is better off doing, namely making our own choices, kind of exercising our own judgment about whatever it is we do day to day. And this can apply to when you're waitressing, by day and going to school by night, or vice versa, or for somebody who is a cashier, let's say. So Jeff Bezos talks about how he flipped burgers at, I don't remember where, McDonald's, right, as a teenager. And you could imagine, not knowing someone's going to become a Jeff Bezos, or someone who will never be a Jeff Bezos, but actually is just going to be a really competent, really engaged, really thoughtful customer service person at a restaurant. There is a way of approaching that work where you're really showing up to it, where you're making choices, where you notice inefficiencies and, silly, outdated ways of doing things, and you replace those, with a slightly better way, right? You even just set up the environment so that the credit card swiping machine is closer to the customer, and the customer doesn't have to, reach over 4 things and knock things over. You're trying to improve the customer experience, right? And you love your job and you care about it and you show up to it and you think about what you're doing. To me, that is that is just as legitimate a manifestation of that human ideal as Jeff Bezos founding Amazon, actually. And so I don't actually think, and it's hard in the same ways that it's hard, just kind of on a smaller scale. But there are all kinds of pressures on you to do it the way that your manager has always done it, and you're scared to piss off the manager, and maybe they'll fire you. And if you get fired, maybe you'll never get another job. And anyway, it's just easier to go with the flow and not rock the boat, and and it's easier to keep your mouth shut when someone's treating you a little bit badly, and to not stand up for yourself. And then that becomes a vicious cycle that then leads you to feeling really, really constrained and, kind of disempowered in your personal relationships, right? The default is that we struggle with these things, and each of us within our scope, relative to whatever our life projects, I believe each of us has the capacity, each of us has that internal agency to do differently, to think for ourselves, to challenge that status quo.
So what's the fundamental difference then? Is it courage, or the desire to act despite the fear? What's the?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's a middle. I think the mechanism for becoming that kind of person, the mechanism for kind of what differentiates the people who characteristically engage with life in the way I'm talking about, and the people who characteristically don't, is precisely that: it's character. And I don't think that your character is something you can just, snap your fingers and overnight you just become super agential and assertive and, start doing everything your own way and not worrying about what other people think. It doesn't work that way. It's not an easy fix. It's not an overnight deal, which is why, I work with people often for a fairly long stretch of time to really help them to radically better themselves. And there's a whole process to go through in order to do that. But crucially, you can do that. You can change your character. And that's, in a way, that's the currency in which I deal, is the currency of character change.
All right, so let's unpack that a little bit more. And I've got an idea in my head that I want to test with you. I feel like I'm very spoilt today. I get to test my own hypotheses with a clinical psychologist. This is wonderful,
Oh,
all right? So,
fun.
so one of the things that we talk about when we talk about things like peer pressure, and you can think about things like the Ash experiment and the like, that sometimes, and we think about hierarchy of needs, I'll use Glass's choice theory as the example here, where our need for survival, our need for love and belonging becomes more important than anything else, right? And you spoke about freedom before. People do want freedom of choice and they do want freedom from oppression, but a superior need is the need for love and belonging and the need for survival. And when we talk about peer pressure, we then get in these situations where the need for love and belonging becomes greater than the need to be right. And what I'm hearing from you here in this character, this is what I want to test with you, that when you were talking about character and I'm talking about values and beliefs, etc., that these people, the ones, you talked about in the shop where they go, oh, this isn't quite right, this doesn't work, where the need to be right becomes greater than the need for love and belonging. Kind of the script flips. How does that sit with you?
A great question. Let me start by pushing back on the framework a little bit, because I actually have somewhat of a heterodox view on the hierarchy of needs idea. First of all, Maslow didn't quite, as often happens, there's been sort of some drift in understanding, and in the popularization of the theory. So Maslow, I'm not necessarily knocking on Maslow, who originally came up with this concept, but at least as it's understood today, the kind of popular representation of the hierarchy of needs, I think gets some things importantly wrong. Because if you think about this idea that, well, first we need to survive, we need, food, and we need a roof over our heads, and we need to be safe, and then we need to be loved, and then we can worry about pursuing the truth and self-actualizing. How would that work in a context where we don't already have this advanced, sophisticated civilization around us? So imagine if we're on a desert island, or if we're in, hunter-gatherer, so we're trying to actually figure out, there's no agriculture yet. And we have a need to survive by finding food. How would we go about that? Would we go about it through just kind of reflexive, kind of, fight or flight based, reactive, let me grab at the first thing that looks like it might be edible and just shove it in my mouth? Well, that would be a path to demise. What we would actually have to do is we would have to learn a lot about our environment and think it through and innovate. And that's, in fact, there's a long history of innovation that's led to where now, in the kinds of countries, at least where I know you and I live, it's very rare for us to even, we don't worry about starving. We worry about obesity, right? We worry about eating too much. But that's because people have applied their human ingenuity, their agency, their innovative spirit to solving that problem, motivated by survival, right? That's what gives rise to that need. If you think about, in the context of COVID, suddenly, there were these memes going around where the hierarchy of needs had been inverted such that Wi-Fi was at the bottom. And suddenly, or toilet paper. That's what it was. It had been Wi-Fi. Now it was toilet paper and and takeout or delivery, whatever, right? Where we're suddenly realizing things that we've taken for granted are suddenly being, taken away from us, or rather the normal means of getting our needs met have suddenly been yanked out from under us. And part of what that meant is we had to get creative, we had to innovate, we had to, and look at all the innovation that came out of COVID, horrific though, it's been, this awful worldwide pandemic, but this is the sort of context out of which human progress and ingenuity springs, right? Now, just we're talking over Zoom and it's become such a normal everyday occurrence. People, so many people are working remotely. I do most of my therapy and coaching remotely. It was unheard of, however many years ago, that it would just be so easy. Right? The ways that, the food delivery kind of industry, all Instacart has emerged as this major competitor to Amazon and its Amazon Fresh experiment, right? Where now I can't remember the last time I went grocery shopping because I had to, because now, there's this new innovative, technologically enabled way for me to get my needs met, right? And so I don't actually think it's true that like creativity, innovation, knowledge pursuit is a luxury that comes after we have met our survival needs. I think there's something really flipped about that idea. I think it's actually through our ingenuity, our independent thinking, our willingness to sometimes challenge the status quo, that we get our needs met. And that includes our needs for love and belongingness. Because the person in the, in Starbucks, McDonald's, or who is prioritizing their need for belongingness in the sense that like they want to get along with the manager and be liked by the manager. So they don't mention the fact that they feel threatened every time the manager, makes fun of their outfit or whatever. Like, are they getting real belongingness in that circumstance? I don't think so. I think they're getting a kind of temporary illusion of belongingness in the sense of like, they don't piss off the manager in the moment, but they're also creating a growing rift between their full self that has the needs that it has and sees what it sees, and this manager who increasingly is actually, trampling on the person's needs and doesn't realize it, right? So I don't actually think that these fundamental needs ever really need conflict. And when they seem to conflict, I think it's because of something we're doing wrong. It's because of some lack of perspective or some psychological hangup that's sort of keeping us from really kind of seeing the full road and the kind of the full picture within which we're trying to live and thrive.
That's really interesting, Gena, and thank you. I've never had it described like that before, and it's really going to be something that I go away and stop and reflect and think upon for sure, about the fact that these needs actually in normal everyday life are congruent, and there's only moments in time where it comes into conflict, and I'm sure we'll come back.
Seeming conflict.
Yeah.
And it's a radical view, and I'm happy to double down on it anytime.
It's that perception that then drives the way we think about what we're seeing in front of us, though, around that conflict. And I think that we'll probably come back to this avoidance of conflict later based on the pre-conversation you and I had. I want to now come back to this innovation, and this, I think, plays strongly into the builder's mindset. What I heard from you, Gena, is that necessity driving innovation. So COVID was a great example, and I think the world proved itself to be more resilient than we ever gave it credit for, individually and collectively.
Yeah.
So there's that necessity driving innovation. But what I'm trying to unpack with this builder's mindset, these builders, they're innovating regardless of necessity, right? So we might have it inherently inside us that when pushed into a corner, we're going to innovate and get creative and get ourselves out of the corner. But these builders are like, everyone else is happy right now, and yet they're going, no, I'm not happy. I want something more.
Yeah, we couldn't have more. Yeah.
I want to bring something into existence.
It could be better.
Yeah. So tell me, what's different between that person that innovates despite necessity versus let's say the normal human being that will innovate during necessity?
It's a great question. So again, I actually think it's more a difference in degree than a difference in kind. Even though it's so dramatic, it might really look like a difference in kind. I think the most ambitious innovators, in a way, have the widest gaze and the farthest gaze in terms of where they see room for the improvement of the human condition, which all of this really is about. Like, I mean, in a sense, you could say, well, there's never been any necessity for, vaccines and all this medical technology and the internet. And, people have survived for a little while painfully, but they've survived without all these things. So do we need that? Like, do we really need, do we need cars and, air conditioning? And and there's real conflict in the world around whether we need these things and whether they're worth the trade-offs with the environment, right? And to what extent are we just trying to play God when we try and make these innovations, right? In what sense do we need them? Well, in the sense that to the extent that we want to live, both literally in the sense of the longer we want to live, the better our medical knowledge and technology needs to be. And clearly that's still a work in progress. We could still do better. And there are still people innovating in longevity research, right? And then trying to cure cancer and all the different ways that like we could be healthier and more resilient as a species and as individuals, right? And that also applies to the quality of life in terms of like how many choices do we have available to us? How many different ways, like the fact that I routinely coach people not only on their professional, but their personal lives, who are out in the dating world, right? And they're just cursing the dating apps and, it's so hard. And, they don't want to have to get rejected again. And it's just like, how do I know when I should or shouldn't go on a second date myself? And there are all these people who, and all this swiping. And what they don't realize is the luxury of being able to make all these choices about and being able to meet people whom you'd never have just met at a bar, but based on like some match algorithm that allows you, to talk to people because you have shared interests, people who are in a different state, people who, are in a different income bracket or whatever, where before, for most of human history, who you mate with was just prescribed for you, right? Like there just wasn't even a question of choosing who to love and who to marry or whether to marry or the configuration in which you want your romantic relationships to, right? The fact that we have all these choices is a massive achievement, right? Like it wasn't the default. And so to me, all those things could be seen as part of the necessity that you talk about, that you mentioned, where how high we set our sights. Like there's no real cap. That's why I talk about raising the ceiling. Like, there's no limit on how much better and richer and more diverse and more resilient and more interesting human life can get. Certainly we haven't approached any such ceiling or come anywhere close to it. And I think the most ambitious people see that. Like they set their sights farther. I'm like, dang it, I want to cure cancer. I don't want to just, come up with this one, temporary like Band-Aid solution or whatever it may be.
Yeah, this is really interesting, Gena. Now, my curiosity is getting away with me so much today. I want to unpack that a little bit more. So this pursuit of better, I love it, first of all. Then that pursuit of better is going to show up in a few different ways. And the pictures I was thinking of when you were talking is that pursuit of better might take a materialistic turn, and that is not necessarily a path to happiness, by the way. This material, I just want a bigger car, I want a better house, etc. And I think it's well documented now that when you get that bigger house, you just want another bigger house, etc. It's not exactly a pursuit of happiness there. But then when you said, I want to cure cancer, etc., the pursuit of better is more about impact.
So this is, I'm really glad you're raising this. I'm actually writing a piece on this topic as we speak. So hopefully there'll be a Substack post soon that addresses this more fully. But this is another area where I think we think in a false dichotomy about this whole issue of like pursuing materialistic values, let's say, versus whatever is the other thing, like spiritual, meaningful, what is it? I think there's something, I think there's a deep-seated and historically old false dichotomy at play where, like, what does it mean for someone to just want a bigger house? Why do they want a bigger house? Because nobody just wants a bigger house for the heck of it. And certainly nobody wants more money for the heck of it. They want it for something. Maybe it's for what they think it symbolizes. They think, well, if I have a bigger house, then all these people are going to drive by and see my big house. And then I can show off about the big house that I bought to all of these fancy, whatever tech, founders or all of these, hoity-toity, like PTO parents who like, or when I go back for my reunion, I'll show them how cool I am. And it like, yes, it's all hot air. Like none of this is real. It's all trying to affect the illusion of something good in other people's eyes. And I think that's often what's actually being measured by the kinds of studies you're talking about, which find that people who are just like piling on material goods don't end up happier. Because the important question is like, well, why are they doing that? Versus, I think there can be really good reason to want a particular sort of house that happens to be luxurious and large. Like you have a vision for the kind of experience you want your family to have, growing up. Like you want your kids to be able to like dash off down the hall and experience the freedom and the, just like open space of like, whatever open plan, whatever you call that. This is something my husband and I have talked about when we were thinking about whether to buy a house, or you want to have a big yard so that you can really realize the vision of, like hosting kid activities, or having big family gatherings, or whatever it is, like that it means something to you. Or you want it to be a space where you can also sometimes bring the team for, like where you really get to curate the environment. I mean, Steve Jobs, I think, may come up more than once in this conversation, because I've been thinking of him and his story a lot lately as I think about the builder's mindset. Like, he was very thoughtful, just as he was thoughtful about the design of his products. He was very thoughtful about the design of his spaces, especially sort of later in life when he was married and had kids and like wanted to create a certain kind of bohemian-esque, kind of hippy-dippy, but also like spacious experience for his family. Like, he wanted his kids to feel like the world is their oyster and to be able to plant stuff in the garden and right. Like, is that materialistic? It costs a lot of money. And he had it in mind, I imagine, in part as one benefit of getting a bigger, profit, or getting a bigger return on investment on his products, is like, what can this buy me? But like, it's not a question of what status is it going to buy me in the eyes of these peers. It's what kind of life will I be able to design for myself and for my loved ones? And that to me is a very different question.
Yeah, I really like it, Gena. And the things that I'm hearing there when I hear you talk is, one is driven by service of self and our own ego and how we want to be seen by others. And the other one is service of others and providing experiences to others and from a more altruistic kind of element in terms of why I might do that. Yeah, really interesting.
Can I be a sore thumb and do it again?
Yeah,
thing where I say, actually, there's a false dichotomy. I know it gets annoying. It gets ridiculous at a certain point, but I think it's sort of the same. I'm a bit of a broken record because there's I think a core underlying theme where I would frame it a little differently. I think what's happening with the first case, is it service of self? Are you serving yourself in the sense of like, you're going to be happier, richer, more fulfilled, your life, you're going to drink your life to the least because you got this bigger house that will impress the other moms? Like, is that really yourself, or is it about a BS impression of yourself that you're trying to uphold in lieu of having a real self?
Just to cut you off there, Gena,
right?
That's what I meant.
No, I know that's probably what you mean, but I actually think it's important because, go ahead.
Yeah, it's about the story you tell yourself about yourself and how you want to be seen by others. Not service of self as in something that's going to fulfill you. It's
right.
just
fuel. But that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. But why that's really important is that in the second case, I would not call it altruism, because I actually think it's importantly selfish in the sense that it's your life that you're building. You're not doing it for a bunch of strangers in Africa or wherever it is that everyone now currently believes that you should be donating all your money, right? Like, and maybe there are causes you care about and you donate some of your money to those causes, but like, you have the self-assertion and sort of like the self-confidence, the self-love to prioritize your life and like your family and your kids and your community and like the things you care about. And I do think it sort of has to be personal in that way, in a way that I actually think there's a conception of like selflessness and altruism that I actually think corrodes that, where like either you're going to be one of these materialists who just wants to impress the PTO moms, or you're going to be like Mother Teresa, right? Or you're not going to think about yourself at all. Like, that's a false dichotomy where there's no room for like a genuine interest in the self as an agent in the world building an awesome life, which I'm all about ultimately. Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, it's really good. And not everything has to be a dichotomy either, right? So it can be a spectrum and there can be self-fulfilling kind of elements that come into this way that we live. And we know from things like the gratitude study from Seligman, et cetera, that we know that that's where real fulfillment can actually come from. And you could call, all these philanthropists, did they do it for themselves or did they do it for others? And the answer is bit of both. Bit of both.
Yeah. And I think there's a way to do things for others that is 100% aligned with, and not just aligned with, but that is actually for you, in the sense that these are the people you value and the causes you value, and that means something to you. And these are like, this is a world you want to build for yourself as you're living in it. And yourself is an extended self, right? Like, my kids are part of me. The students that I've mentored, my clients, they're part of me. Like, their fates are now wrapped up with mine, right? Like, I will be worse off if a client of mine decides to walk off a cliff, or metaphorically or literally, right? So in that sense, there's no conflict. There's no trade-off there between you and them.
Now, I want to circle back to something that you mentioned quite some time ago, but we've been getting quite deep on a few other things. You said about character change. There's going to be at least some people, I'm going to say from more of a fixed mindset approach, but there's going to be some people who say, yeah, but you are who you are. You can't change who you are. What do you mean by character change?
Yeah. So this I have written a Substack piece about. And so anyone who wants to get the even longer answer, it's called In Defense of Radical Self-Betterment. So it's like a whole long piece where I lay out a kind of my approach to that kind of character change. But briefly, it's the process of reprogramming ourselves, right? So, we have, I think everyone knows, we have lots of habits that we've internalized, right? If we had to consciously and effortfully and explicitly rethink and replan every, moment's kind of decision and action, then we would be completely paralyzed. We couldn't walk, we couldn't talk, we couldn't, much less like run a team or a company, right? So many of the things that we do day to day are automatized. They're now just part of our code, if you will, right? They're programs that are running on autopilot. And a lot of those formed really early. They got programmed when we were maybe 3 or 5, right? Or even when we were in our teens or early adulthood, but at a point where like we weren't either fully conscious of or in charge of the inputs and how we process them, right? And so, maybe we ended up with a kind of implicit fear of by other people and the power that they wield over us and the ways that we are kind of tyrannized by them if we aren't on our best behavior, right? And maybe that's based in real experiences that we had. We all felt relatively helpless to some extent in the face of, the parents or teachers or whoever was in positions of authority over us as kids, because that literally was the case. Like, we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do anything without those grown-ups to help us and to support us. And so we've internalized certain models of ourselves, of the world, of what's possible, of what's, worthwhile. I think you had put it really nicely of like the art of the possible. Am I remembering that phrase? Which really resonated with me, right? Like, we have all these implicit programs that go all the way down to sort of core beliefs, like mental models, that then trickle down to the kind of the filters through which we see and hear and pay attention and sort of remember the things that happen to us, right? We know about confirmation bias, such that you can remember and notice the things that are congruent with your already held assumptions and beliefs, and you tend to sort of neglect the things that aren't, right? And so, like, anytime someone's a little bit mean to us, anytime that we try to stick our neck out and then nobody seems to care or pay attention, that just reaffirms that, see, I have no real power to affect outcomes in social conflict, let's say, or, if I rock the boat, then there will be massive blowback and I won't be able to handle it. It's going to be intolerable. And part of the way we maintain those programs is that we act them out by, let's say, avoiding the confrontations that we're scared of because we think they would be catastrophic, which in turn then leads us to actually have less power in our relationship and, feel more like walked all over because we're not actually telling anybody, what we want or need, or we're not kind of inserting our own input. right, into the decision making. And so that then just reinforces for us that, aha, see, of course I can't speak up because, like, look, I have no power here. It's these other people who, or, it's just others, or it's the world that's got the agency and not me. And the road to character change is, it consists of, and I put this in a stepwise kind of sequence because there's a logical sequence to it, but of course it's not like clean and linear. Of course, it's highly iterative. But if you kind of think logically, like, what do you need to do in order to change your program? First, you need to know what it is. And so a huge part of the work is in just like self-awareness, just building that self-knowledge, just like noticing, monitoring, observing patterns of feelings, thoughts, behaviors that then point us to underlying, mindsets or assumptions that then we can start to consciously, deliberately, and challenge. And part of the work of challenging them is even just in using our current adult knowledge and cognitive, ability and sophistication to rethink those old assumptions. Right? Like, wow, so I, like, emotionally, I tend to act as if and feel as if I, like, have no power over this person. Is that true? Or, or like, as if this person, it means ill, like as if this person's going to hurt me. What's the actual evidence? Like, what do I actually know? Can I bring other information to bear that I'm not, that isn't automatically getting inputted to the program, right? But like, I have conscious agency over what I seek out, right, as kind of corrective evidence. Like, maybe I can rethink this assumption. Now, that's still not going to make the feeling go away. I'm still going to feel really scared and really, anxious and threatened and insecure when I go to, give the hard feedback or have the hard conversation with the person. But intellectually, at least, like, I'm kind of on board with it not probably being as bad as it feels. And to get over the feeling, I'm actually going to have to go and do it a bunch. Because the only way to ultimately rewire ourselves and change our program is to put ourselves out there emotionally into the very situations that feel scary or dangerous, that kind of run against our program, and show ourselves, walk ourselves by the hand through those situations to be able to see that they go different, to be able to sort of collect the counter evidence in real time, right? Where we have skin in the game. Like, wow, that was a really awkward and hard conversation. And actually we ended up feeling closer and more aligned at the end of it. That was unexpected. Like, now I actually trust them more and they trust me more. And now we're like lighter, like now we're going out for drinks. That was not at all my mental model of how this was going to go. Right? And like having a bunch of experiences like that you accumulate to gradually pull up those programs and replace them with new ones.
Yeah, I love it, Gena. Let me play back what I'm hearing from you. And the power of beliefs is coming through. And whether that's a limiting belief or an empowering belief, right? If it's a limiting belief, it's something that's holding you back. If it's an empowering belief, it might actually drive you into action. And about the story that you tell yourself about yourself inside your head, I'm the kind of person that, and finish that sentence, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's there. And are you going to challenge that belief? Is it true? Is that really true? Right?
Yeah.
So, I really love that. And so am I the kind of person that eats healthy? Or am I the kind of person that I don't have any willpower, I just indulge myself, right? So all of those things, all the way through to in the workplace.
And even like, sorry, and just to really, and even like, is that even the right question for me to ask? Like, am I a person? But do I have to either be that kind of person or this kind of person? Or like, am I thinking in a black and white way that I'm excluding other possibilities, right? Or I'm like, maybe there's more nuance here. So that's part of the work. But
all right.
Go ahead.
All right. So challenging these beliefs. And then what I heard, once we've challenged the belief and go, hey, is that true? Then I'm hearing a little bit of discomfort. I'm hearing that the change is going to come from stepping out of my comfort zone to try something that might be contra to the original belief, just to experiment, to go, okay, well, I've asked myself, is it true? Now I'm going to try and I'm going to test.
Right.
So let's talk about that, avoiding the feedback that that you should be giving to one of your team members or even your boss.
Let's say.
It's uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. But you tell your story in your head that it's going to go horribly, But then when you do it
Right.
and it's not as horrible as you thought, well, then you've got a new belief. How does that sit with you?
Gradually and eventually.
Gradually.
No, really well put. Yeah. And it's not going to be an overnight one-time deal, but like it's incremental and you start to notice it usually pretty quickly once you've tried it once. But but there are lots of ways we can sabotage it for ourselves because remember, these programs are, well rehearsed. They go way back. They're ingrained. And so part of the work is sort of just recognizing and having realistic expectations about like, oh yeah, like this is going to take a lot of time. It's not going to be linear. I'm going to regress a lot, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's in the nature of what it looks like to change, each part of myself, right? That's all in the nature of psychological change, and good for me that I'm persisting through those setbacks. Right? So like,
that's good. How do we make it a lasting change, Gena? So let's keep on using this feedback one. And the reason why I keep circling back to this one is this is the leadership project. And for all leaders listening to this, have a good think about this. We know that giving feedback is one of those limiting beliefs for many, not for everyone. If you're good at this, well done.
A lot of us.
A
heck of a lot of us.
For a lot of us.
A shocking lot of us. Including, those of us who supposedly should know better, but still. Right. We have this limiting belief.
All right. So this is a limiting belief for many of us. We avoid conflict. We avoid giving that feedback, even though most of us appreciate getting the feedback ourselves, because once you get the feedback, you can do something about it. There's something that stops us, right? So what I want to talk about now is lasting change. So let me use the same analogy or the same example for that. So let's say that someone does that. They've got that limiting belief about giving feedback. Something is holding them back. They do what you just said. They challenge, is that belief really true? And they ask themselves the question enough so that they will act. They'll go out of their comfort zone. They'll have the courage to go and give the feedback. They give the feedback and it goes much better than they ever expected, and their life goes on. But then 3 months from now, they're back to, I hate giving feedback. How do we make it a lasting change?
Yeah. I mean, like some of this parallels any other habit change that we might undertake. And I feel like everybody's experienced some form of it. Like you build an exercise routine and then there's, a big life change, or you get sick for a while and whoops, like you're off the wagon. And then, and like it takes 2 weeks supposedly, give or take, for like a typical kind of like physical habit to catch on. And then it takes no time at all for it to kind of slide, slip aside. And then if you've been at it for a year, then it's going to, take a bit more for it to backslide, and it's going to take less time for you to get back on the wagon. And if you've been at it for 5 years, so some of it I think really is like it takes time to program ourselves, and the default is that we're going to backslide. So plan for that and stay vigilant to it, or have periodic checks for yourself, knowing, so I probably don't need the daily journaling anymore that I needed at the beginning to make this into a habit, but I probably could still use like a weekly journal, right? Because otherwise I'm going to forget and I'm going to fall off, or when things get really tough, or when I'm exhausted because I'm doing this fundraise and I'm sort of worn thin and don't have my kind of, my full mental resources on hand, like I'm just going to backslide into avoiding. I won't even realize it's happening until it's already, festered. And so let me have my periodic check-ins with myself, or better yet, maybe check-ins with a coach or with a partner or with a friend, right? Like someone who can help keep me accountable. And maybe we're keeping each other accountable because there are ways that each of us is trying to change, right? So that's one thing. It's just like knowing it's going to be hard and you'll forget, and being realistic with yourself about how often do you need those external prompts that you put into place, because you're the one designing your environment to serve you and your desired change. So how do you want to design your environment so that it pings you periodically, so that it sets you up for success, for continued success? So that's one thing. That's just like super general. That's for any habit that you're trying to change. And these are, a type of habit that you're changing. And I mean, another thing, which I wanted to say earlier, and it also applies to this question of maintenance, is that it's very natural for us to assume that we have to be able to feel it in order to do it. Like this is a very common, it's even like the idea of fake it till you make it. It's like, pretend you don't feel anxious and uncertain until actually you don't. And I actually think there's something wrong with that way of thinking, because it implies that you can't feel anxious and do it anyway, which is a problem, because that's the whole technology of change. You've got to be able to feel anxious and do it anyway. You've got to do it when you don't feel like it yet, because that's what's going to teach you later to feel like it. But like we talked about, like you've got to be able to go have the conversation when you feel really anxious and you've got the knots in your stomach and it's awkward and you lost sleep at night, just like pre-ruminating on the conversation and how horribly it's going to go, even in spite of all your, tools, like, and you still go and do it. That's the way to change. And then you keep doing that. And so I think getting comfortable with discomfort is one of the key kind of fundamental underlying resilience factors for being able to sustain this kind of changes. Like that's the meta habit. It's one of the meta habits that you want to constantly be attending to and strengthening, so that then all the particular habits don't backslide the moment that it's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Like the moment that those feelings creep back in, which they will, because they're pretty hardwired in us by the time we're adults, of like, oh shoot, I'm really scared to have this conversation again. Like that's okay, as long as you know you can still go have it, basically.
Yeah, I really like it, Gena. And some of the things that are popping into my head, the last bit there, having some really realistic expectations of what success is going to look like. And if you had a different perception of what success was going to look like, you might get disappointed when, oh, okay, it never got comfortable. I need to be able to live with the idea that being comfortable with being uncomfortable so I can act in the face of the discomfort regardless. I think that's a really good one for us to learn, particularly around that feedback part. It might never come natural to you, but the results are worth it. So
fully. Yeah, and it will incrementally get more natural too, which I do think is important.
Yeah.
It's like there is real payoff, and it's nonlinear, and it's incremental, and that's just in the nature of it.
And the other one I'm hearing a lot there is about the resilience. All right, so the habit building, and there's all those studies around. It takes 66 days on average to build a new habit, etc. But what people then get into their mind that it has to be perfection every day, but habit building is actually, it's more about what happens when it doesn't go right. What do you do? Do you drop your bundle and go? The diet's a classic one for this one. Is I'm trying to eat healthy every single day of my life. I have a hamburger one day and then, I've blown my diet
and it's
now.
That's called the what the hell effect.
Yeah, the what the hell.
Yeah.
I might as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's It's not because someone has a cheeseburger that they end up failing at their goal. It's because when they have the cheeseburger, that's now their excuse to stop trying to fulfill their goal, right? It's classic. Yeah, we have all sorts of terms for this, in the behavior change literature, which sounds like you're familiar with. But yeah, I mean, a framework I've often come back to, but I haven't, I didn't make this up, but I like it. It's the lapse versus relapse versus collapse framework, which I learned in the context of I was doing like an obesity intervention, or behavior change intervention for obesity. And it's so helpful to be able to distinguish. Like, so a lapse is, you have a day where you eat a cheeseburger and whatever, follow up, or if you're trying to, quit smoking or drinking, like you have a drink, you have a cigarette, or maybe you even go a week where you're just, back to your old habit. A relapse is where, I had a lapse. Now I'm off the wagon. Oh, well, okay. And then you kind of keep going like that for a while. And now that, now you're like closer to being back to square one. So now you kind of relapse. A collapse is when you've just really stopped trying forever. And like the only way for it to become a collapse is when you die, because until that day, you can decide, that you're going to get back on the wagon, right? And try again. So like, don't let a lapse become a relapse, and don't let a relapse become a collapse. And I really like that kind of framework for it.
Yeah, love it. And I think that you can translate that into your leadership practice, everyone listening to the show. So you're out there trying to build yourself as a leader and become the leader that you wish you always had and the leader that your team deserve. not everything's going to go to plan every single day. So you need these resilience tools to be able to go, okay, it didn't work today, but I'm going to go again tomorrow. And I don't mean, the definition of insanity, try the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. It's about resilience and flexibility and adaptability to be able to go, oh, okay, that was interesting. And the awareness and noticing and naming when something, oh, okay, well, that didn't go exactly how I am planned. What am I going to do slightly different next time? Not just drop your bundle and never try again. What am I going to do differently next time to try again? How does that sit with you, Gena?
Yeah, that sits great, and it sort of reminds me of like one of my most oft peddled behavior change goals, sort of what I think of as virtues of character, actually, because it enables so many of the others and it's so essential for powering our own behavior change, is what I call self-honesty, which is literally what it sounds like, being honest with ourselves and striving to be ever more honest with ourselves. And that includes things like, oh, yeah, wow, I've really been avoiding hard conversations. I've been back into, I've gotten back to my ways. Or like, wow, yeah, I think they might be right about this one actually kind of being on me, that I really dropped the ball. Or, I've been claiming to myself and everyone around us that like we have product market fit, but actually maybe we kind of don't, like if you're a founder. And for us to be able to really attack that as a virtue in its own right, and to then like pride ourselves, because I think it's really right to pride ourselves on that self-honesty as a virtue, realizing like this is necessary. This is a necessary prerequisite to any further change that I want to make. Because if I can't trust myself, if I can't sort of trust my mental model to be self-correcting and sort of truth tracking, then I have no power to change anything, because I'm not even going to admit it, right? And because I don't even know, because I can't even genuinely track my progress. I'm sort of like, I've lost before I've entered the ring. And that's the default, because it's really easy to BS ourselves. It's really easy to lie to ourselves in subtle ways that we're barely aware of, especially when it comes to our self-assessment, right? And like, and the mistakes that we might be making, and the responsibility we do or don't have. And so to be able to really like practice and pride ourselves on practicing self-honesty as a virtue in its own right, I think it's a tremendous motivator for then changing a bunch of the particular things that we self-honestly acknowledge aren't there yet. Yeah, like we can have all sorts of faults and problems and still have this solid foundation for loving ourselves enough to be worth changing for, because at least we're keeping it real. And that's a big deal. It's no small thing to be keeping it real with ourselves.
Yeah, I love it. Love this concept of self-honesty and being honest with ourselves about where we're at. So look, Gena, we've covered a lot of ground today. I'm going to attempt, because there's so many things that we covered, I'm going to attempt to recap a few of them. So we've been talking about this builder's mindset, this idea that we're going to challenge the status quo, the pursuit for better, but tapping into what is the real motivation behind why we want to challenge for better. We've spoken about character and character change, and that it is possible, and addressing limiting beliefs, to be able to ask yourself the question, is this belief, this ingrained belief that I have, is it really true? Is it really true? And then being able to step into discomfort to test whether it's true, and to notice and name what happens so that we can start building these habits. About having the resilience that when things don't go exactly the way that you're expected, that you do try again. You might adapt and change, but you'll try again, not just give up at the first hurdle. And about this self-honesty to really check in with ourselves as to go, well, it's still the same question. Is it really true? Is it really true? And the stories that we tell ourselves, checking in as to whether we're true. And these are the things that can make lasting habitual changes in our leadership, in the work that we do, in our relationships. Have a really good, if you need to listen to this episode a few times, listen to the things that Gena has been saying and look at yourself in the mirror and see what there applies to you and what you can put into your own leadership journey. All right. So thank you so much, Gena. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've absolutely adored it. I'd love to now go to our final 4 questions. These are the same questions that we ask all of our guests. So first of all, Gena Gorlin, what's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
That it was worth holding out for better.
Oh, nice.
It would have saved me a hell of a lot of time and heartache. Like, I don't need to go on a bunch of crappy dates and, kind of make nice with a bunch of not very interesting, like, lab, like researchers. I mean, in every domain of my life, like, I could just hold out for better, and better would come.
Yeah, love it. All right, fantastic.
I could say more, but it's probably kind of...
I like it. Yeah, it's self-explanatory. I like it. What's your favorite book?
Yeah, so it's The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, which is potentially a big can of worms culturally, and people, it has a lot of different connotations for people, but it's very straightforwardly my favorite book. This one's actually an easy one for me. I read it when I was 16, and it was the kind of book that's like there's a before and after for me. Like, it changed my whole kind of life trajectory. And I mean, to put it simply, it portrays a literal builder because he's an architect. The story of Howard Roark, who's an architect who starts out, he has just been expelled from college when we first meet him and when the story starts. And he's kind of indifferent, and he's fine and actually kind of okay with it because he's already moving on to the next step in his career of kind of building his way and upholding his vision. And the whole story is one of believing, along with a major character in the story, not to spoil it for those who haven't read it, but kind of believing he's doomed to fail and being completely mystified as to why he still perseveres. And then ultimately seeing by the inexorable logic of the book, like, yeah, of course he wins. Of course he makes it because his way works. And like, the rest of my life is different because of that. Like, I don't have to give up on my integrity. I have belongingness.
Very congruent with everything that you shared with us today. All right, thanks, Gena. What's your favorite quote?
Pretty much. This one's much harder because it definitely changes day to day, week to week. But I will have to go with it. So there are 2 Steve Jobs quotes that are like battling in my head for current favorite status. But yeah, I'm going to go with the one that I think captures more of the essence of it for me. You may have run into it before. It's the one where he was doing some interview, some liberal arts college, I think, and he's asked to kind of sum up his own like philosophy of life, or something like the question you asked about what does he wish he knew. And he says, everything around you that you call life was made up by people who are no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can shape it. You can make something that people want to use. Like, you can rewrite history. You can rewrite the future. And once you realize this, then nothing will ever be the same.
Love it.
It's a little bit of a paraphrase, but I think I got most of it.
Yeah, well done. All right.
Yeah.
And finally, Gena, there's going to be people listening to this episode that have been completely enthralled about this concept. Builders, character change, all of these things. How do people find you if they'd like to know more about you and your work?
Subscribe to my Substack. You can subscribe for free. It's builders.genagorlin.com. And then if you want to reach out to me personally, you can do that through my website. It's just genagorlin.com. Or if you're a founder looking for coaching, it's genagorlin.com/founders.
Brilliant.
And Gena with an E.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. And we'll put the links in the show notes as well, Gena, so people can find it. So thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your insights and wisdom. I feel richer for having this conversation, and I know that the audience will as well. So thank you so much for your time.
I learned a lot too. Thank you for your thoughtful questions.
You've been listening to The Leadership Project. In the next episode, I'll be joined by Dan Tashini, where we unlock the secrets of courageous leadership and creative conflict resolution. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. We bring you live streams, video podcasts, and curated videos on all things leadership, personal development, and high-performance mindsets every single week. thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mickspiers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spiers. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.